Welcome everyone to our expert interview on art and design thinking. My name is Kevin James. I am an assistant dean and director of fiscal and administrative affairs here at the Collins College of Professional Studies here at St. John's University. It is my distinct honor today to welcome us to this open discussion on art and design thinking and to introduce our wonderful panelists who have graced us with our presence in order to discuss this topic today. Our first panelist is Dr. Luca Iandoli, Associate Dean and Associate Professor from St. John's University, studying for global programs and research, as well as Dr. Giuseppe Zollo from the University of Federico II in Naples, Italy. Today, we'll hear our discussion on art and design thinking and the impact it has not just around the world that we live in, but also in the future in terms of prototyping and all forms of product development that we see in today's world. To start off our discussion, I wanted to open it up with a question to our wonderful panelists. So it turns out that Dr. Iandoli and Dr. Zollo have created this wonderful book called Effectively Simple, A Guide to Creative Design in the Age of Aesthetics. In this book, they really pay close attention to the impact of art and on the impact of art and the edge and how it gives an edge to the creative thinker. I guess my question is, why art? And what can artists teach to designers?
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks everybody for coming, for listening to us today. It's really a pleasure to share some of the work that Giuseppe and I are doing on this topic. As Kevin mentioned, yes, we are writing a book. It's upcoming, should be out in the spring. But it's a little bit of a culmination of the work that we've done and on this idea of basically what we can learn from art and artists and what we can apply from this learning to the way we design things. So our background is a little bit not really in design. We come from engineering and specifically in my case, computer engineering. So it's mostly about information, right? Information processing, information management. So the basic idea that is one of the basic ideas for our work is that the idea is that the good design is about packing information into some artifact in a way that is useful and is also pleasant to use. So this packing information is the kind of metaphor that we use for design. So we started to think about this and say, okay, who does that basically every day? Who does that really well we can learn from? And after doing research and reading and discussing, we come up with the idea that artists do that. They do that very well, actually, especially great artists. And the nice thing with art is that not only artists pack information, but they do in a way that the aesthetic component of that information makes their message even more effective. So aesthetic or beauty is not just an ornament, it's functional to convey the message. And we think that this is very important for design. Another aspect that we figured out was that artistic reasoning, actually the way we reason has a strong aesthetic component. We do a lot of aesthetic decision, but in general, we think that when we make decisions, this decision have a strong aesthetic component in general. It's not just when it's about aesthetic, but also in everyday life. And the reason why this happens is because aesthetic is really a word that means not just art, but I learned this while I was studying these things, that aesthetic, the origin of the word is from the Greek. It means, aestheta means perceptible things. So it's really about perception. Aesthetic is about perception. So perception is the beginning of knowing, but there's much more than that. So what our artistic reasoning, aesthetic reasoning does, it helps us to integrate different types of information, especially the rational and the emotional information. And we know also from other studies that in our brain, these two functions work together. You cannot have any decision without the emotional component. There are studies showing that people who had impairment at the level of the ability to feel emotion, they also had hard time to make even simple decisions. So I have a visual that I want to show you. We prepared a few visuals to make examples of what we're trying to say. I hope you see this. I don't know if you're familiar with this company. It's an Italian company called Alessi. They make design object mainly for houseware. These are kitchen tools of our project that they did a few years ago, actually a couple of decades ago already. And was inspired by some theory of psychological development of the child. And you see how, these are all kitchenware that are very funny, very, very colored, kind of childish, because that was the idea, that we can have fun while cooking and talking to our inner child. Now, when it comes to art, we have a very, very similar example in Joan Miro. Joan Miro and abstract art in general, they try to do the same. In particular, in this painting, it's called The Garden. Miro combine, very simple shape, kind of bizarre characters, humanized figures, a little bit toy-like shape. And all of this is sort of reflected in the way Alessi designed his kitchenware. It also, I want you to notice that this is not just kind of funny and entertaining, but it's also very useful and very practical, because these objects are very safe, and that working in the kitchen, you can injure this, or you can hurt yourself if you don't use this tool properly. But also they are very functional. There's a lot of ergonomic behind it. So it's a very good example of how you can combine the emotional part and the rational part into an object that works really well, and at the same time is very pleasant to use.
I want to add some consideration about what Luca said just now. The importance of the emotional aspect in understanding the world around us. A child, when he plays some games with things, is able to catch to see things as something to talk with each other, to talk to them, and to build with them a behavior, a relationship. So this kind of this ability to humanize the things and to project on things desire or feelings or intentions is part of the ability to play of a child. And you see in this design of Alessi, or when you feel in general an aesthetic feeling about the world, you make a connection with this world. This is a warm connection, not a cold connection as the connection we have with just using the rationality. And this is an important discovery of neuroscientists. Starting from Damasio's studies, the idea that the emotional thinking is in parallel in many aspects before the rational thinking, and integrate the rational thinking is a very important discovery. And our idea is that we find the most important expression of the ability to make objects, things, by using emotional and rational aspect in the artist works. So for this reason, we choose the art and the analysis of the masterpiece of art as a guide to understand how to make a good design.
Wow, wow. And that is quite interesting, especially the concept of art. And, one of the things that I remark, especially because, and one thing I should mention to our audience is that, I've had also the pleasure of reading bits of the book as well, because we're also teaching it here at St. John's through our Creativity, Innovation, Entrepreneurship course. What's interesting is that art can be seen in different capacities, from the visual that you've seen here, But another area that I think the book kind of goes into also is an experience that you had with a Michelin chef. Well, for our purposes, we can also do this as discussing this actually as Chef Alonso. And it's interesting because you all talk about your experiences with him and your witness to his mastery of ingredients in his cooking. And I think as many of us have probably have experiences, cooking in itself is a form of art, especially if you can do it really well. So, you remark in your book that Alfonso says he's able to seize the soul of an ingredient, right? And one of the most interesting concepts you talk about in your book is what you call also the hidden workflow of the creative process. When I think of creativity, I think creativity has a sense of freedom. The word itself says that. But at the same time, this concept of workflow sounds very foreign or even restrictive in its very nature. So I guess the question that I like to kind of throw out there, for you both is really, what is the workflow of the creative process?
Please, Luca.
You want to take it? You want me to start?
Oh, I just want to introduce the argument, because I remember when we made the interview with Alfonso Iaccarino. Alfonso Iaccarino is a 3-star Michelin chef in a small town near Naples in Italy. And when we went to make an interview with him, we asked him, how do you create your recipes? What is your process? He was not able to give us the process. He just talked about ingredients, and he said, he made an example. And I go to a country in my factory, and I smell the flavor of a tomato. And this sensation is the starting point of my creativity. That because this flavor, this smell was inside me, and I want to recreate this. And in order to do that, I make many experiments, and I tried different composition with different complementary ingredients in order to extract from the tomato the soul, the flavor, the sensation I had. So this is a very interesting approach to the creativity and design. The starting point is a singular point, is a sensation, an image, a feeling, and a small idea. And after that, there is a long process. He told us that during the night, he had an idea, and we went up from the bed, and he went in the kitchen and tried. No, but I think this is a very interesting example how the creativity is a very complex process, but we can analyze this process. And one of the elements we found is this singular starting point. And after that, there are another important aspect, and Luca can talk about this, the constraints. That is, he made some very rigid rules. And the rigid rules are very important for Iaccarino, I think for many artists. And there is a wonderful book on the Maison Carré, Daily Rituals, so great artists. And you in this book find that any artist make very crisp rules in order to create a space with the boundaries to explore. And after that, within these boundaries, within this space, the artist develop an exploration activity in order to analyze any possibilities of this space. In other words, the artist build a language with the syntax, and for example, for painters, he made a syntax with the colors. I use the colors in some way. I use lines in some way. I use shadow and light in some way. Luca, you are showing this painting. So talk about this.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to say there is that, there's this common misconception that creativity is very unstructured, is very like all genius and without rules. In fact, what we found in this interview, in this particular case, but also in other studies on how artists work, that artists are actually very disciplined. They have their own rituals, they have their own structure, they have their own process. Of course, they can change that as they mature or as they grow or change themselves, but they have a process, and not everything is possible. Actually, the more constraints they have sometimes, the better, because they play with those constraints. Like in the case of Alfonso, he told us how, basically start to pair different type of flavors according to his own, Giuseppe says, syntax, is his own language of cooking. And in that language, certain combinations are possible, certain are not. Of course, it's subjective. It's not like something that everybody has to approve or like, but that's a process. And I think actually what makes a great artist is the fact that they identify that process. Maybe most of us, we don't with that type of rigor or with that type of even obsession sometimes. And the language is, in the end, for great artists become what, normally we call it style. So like this painting here, I don't know if you know this one. Is not the painter is famous. This painting is not probably the most famous of his work, but you might recognize some certain style here. Italian painting, Baroque. This is Caravaggio, in fact, and he started this, playing with this contrast with the shadow and the light, and he gave and a lot of other painters just followed for a century or so. Caravaggesque painters just painted that way. It was the only way apparently people could paint at that time. After him, there was no, and of course things changed at some point, but there was like a school, but this school is basically based on these rules that Caravaggio invented. This is another one. You can recognize Van Gogh in this one. Van Gogh has his own language as well. And again, this is not one of his most famous ones, but I think most people will recognize the style, or at least, the type of school or period in which this painting was made. Because again, if you know that language, you can speak it, or at least you can read it. And the same thing happens in design. And I just want to show you this one. I don't know if you can see really well, but it seems a little bit off the slide. But basically you have, on the right, I think you can easily recognize the iPod, first generation iPod. On the left, we have this little radio that was designed by Dieter Rams, German designer. He was the chief designer for Braun for a long time. And he basically invented this minimalist, all white type of cool style that we now attribute to Apple. But actually, Jonathan Ive, Apple chief designer, as mentioned in some interview, that Dieter Rams was one of his sources of inspiration. You can tell it's so straightforward. And Dieter Rams himself, of course, he didn't invent this from scratch. He came from the Bauhaus style. And that was another language that was born in Germany at the beginning of the past century. At some point, became sort of mainstream and translated into all of this. Decided now is back again, this love for simplicity, very clean, kind of Zen, white, Apple design. So this language basically propagates through time, and of course you get changed, but you can see that there are rules anyway. So the idea that workflow translates into again to rules, into a language, and that language can be spoken by many other designers. And of course, like any language, a language is like a living being. It changes all the time and evolves. But there's always something that comes from the past that stays there in that language. And that structure is very fascinating to investigate, I think.
Well, I think that's actually quite interesting and fascinating, because it seems to me that based on what you're saying, artists tend to have their own unique language, how they approach their designs, how they look at certain things. And almost to some degree, I mean, you could see it through the art that you see around us, the products we developed, or even through, in my class, for example, we even talk about the impact of music and how there's a certain logic behind how it is usually created by an artist. To kind of also dig into that, I think there's another point that I think you're alluding to a little bit in terms of this notion of simplicity, and also about this notion of maybe potentially complexity, especially in the world of design. I think we often want to design things that are simple, right, and understandable, and you know, and at the same time, when we look at this level of simplicity or being simple, I think a lot of us can probably agree that simple can sometimes be very boring to us in terms of design. And at the same time, we're often trying to find ways to add some level of complexity within the products we design. So it's almost as if, like, because we want to keep it exciting to ourselves, right? And keep a product interesting. And I feel like sometimes we tend to go between each point of the spectrum, you know, between keeping things simple, but at the same time, having complexity, being able to balance between both. And I guess my question then is there a balance? And if so, what does this balance look like? And how can we actually achieve it?
Yeah, we believe that there is a balance that is not easy to find, but you know, that metaphor that I mentioned at the beginning, the idea that designing is about packing information into something, right? That leads us to what we think is a major dilemma for any artist and for any designer for that matter, which is basically, how much information should I need to pack into this thing? I want to say something like, which words do I use? Which graphic do I use? Which, depending on what we are doing, right? The type of the work we are doing, we have different tools. But the problem is always the same. I want to express something, want to communicate something. How can I do this efficiently? So basically using just the right amount of information. Why that is important? Because we know that when information is too much, you know, of course we feel overwhelmed, we feel confused, and the design feels complicated, we don't understand it, and that's a failure. And like you said, the opposite is also true. When there is too little information, we always want more from life, right? We want more performance, we want better tools, we want to improve, we want new gadgets. So that means also more information. Like a new car has to come with something more that the old car doesn't have. And these, of course, risk again to bring us too much toward the complexity, too complex side of the spectrum. So it's like there's a spectrum, and it looks like that in the middle is where we should stay. There's a lot of studies that we have been looking at, also not very recent, to be honest, and some of you who are here might be familiar already with that. Like this study by Berlin, it was in the 70s, he found out that we tend to associate higher level of aesthetic pleasure to intermediate level of complexity. So if we are presented with something that is too kind of simple or too complicated, our aesthetic pleasure is low. But if we have this intermediate level, our aesthetic pleasure peaks. So we conjugate that finding with again, the information processing approach that we have. And we found out this beautiful idea in proposed by a Nobel Prize for physics, Murray Gell-Mann. He invented this method called effective complexity, which is exactly the same concept. So the idea that there is some good complexity, that we like some complexity, but not too much. And Donald Norman, in his book, Living with Complexity, he said the same thing, like users need some complexity, of course, because we want a little bit of excitement. We want a little bit of novelty, but not too much. So that's the problem, though. That's not the solution, right? So the solution is how we find that sweet spot. And we thought that there's two ways to do this. One is a way of working, methodology for that, and another one is some heuristics, design heuristics that we can use. So I have a little video here. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Oh, yes.
So you see here, Pablo Picasso is drawing a bull. We love this video because it's so simple. He makes with a few, few traits with his brush, a beautiful bull. A few little touches here and there, and then you have a bull. It seems like alive in front of you. But so that's kind of the perfect bull for me, right? And not just for me. Of course, you might like it or not. It's the subjectivity also. But the idea is, the thing is that before Picasso arrived to that point, he made a lot of experiments. He experimented with a lot of different ways of drawing a bull. So you have some examples here. And again, you see some are more complex, complex meanings richer in details. Some are very simple, almost stylized. And he made so many of these until he kind of settled down on what he thought was the most effective representation of that bull. Again, the problem is the same. How much information do you need to draw a bull? Okay. And we found the same idea in this beautiful book on design. It's called, I definitely recommend you to read it if you haven't. It's called Watches Don't Tell More Than Time by Dal Coates, that's the author. And this picture comes from that book. You see a cup here. So there's so many possible ways we can draw a cup. We can design a cup. Some are more simple, some are more complicated. So what is the ideal cup? And then it shows something like this. You have scales on a pair of attributes. One is toward the simplicity and the other one is always skewed toward the complexity. And you can position, you can profile your cup in here. So you can have the most obvious trivial cup on the extreme left side and the most complicated weird cup on the extreme of the other extreme. So somehow the good cup, the good design of the cup stays in the middle. It's important, however, I want to specify this because I want to give the impression that, there's one just ideal cup. This intermediate level of complexity is always relative to our subjectivity, also our ability to process that complexity. Some of us are more inclined to absorb complexity, some are less, some are more, have a certain type of background, so other people have another type of background. There could be cultural conditions. So there's always these relative biases, but around the bias, there's some, there's always like the too much and the too little. So in terms of implication for designers, so number one implication is you have to move back and forth. You have to experiment with the simple and the complex, and then you have to find the intermediate one. Now, this is important because most of the time we only do one of the two. Most of the time, we come up with very complex design and we make it very simple. Because simplicity is what we're looking for. But in reality, we are not looking for simplicity. We are just looking for the right amount of complexity. So there's a lot of books on simplicity, but what they talk about, in fact, is the right amount of complexity. Because simple is simple, right? Anybody can do this. Anybody can design a glass like this. So we have to experiment. First, we make it simple, but at some point we also have the courage to say, okay, let's make it complicated now. Let's experiment with complexity. Let's break it and see how much we can push. So that's the other thing that we have to do. So we come up with a model that is basically this. So we identified some design heuristics that are kind of practical things that every designer can do, and are quite general that can be applied to at least any type of visual design, I would say. So if you move toward the overwhelming side of the spectrum, you are looking for novelty. If you move toward the, let's say, the simple, even boring side of the spectrum, you are looking, we call this search for unity. So when we simplify, we look for simplicity, unity. When we complexify, we look for novelty. And we identify that some, and of course, I'm not going to describe all of this because it's going to take too much time, but that's what the book is about. Every chapter is for one of this, provide example from art, from design about its application. So we have basically 4 fundamental heuristics that we identified that help us to simplify our design, and another 4 on the other side that help us to make it more complex. And so, in other words, and to kind of wrap up what I'm trying to say, two things. One, we have to do a lot of experimentation back and forth, trying to complexify and simplify until we kind of hit the right level of complexity. In order to do this in a more, and like you said, we do this already kind of intuitively most of the time. But then what we try to say, okay, you can do this with a more structured way using this strategy, so that you know exactly, or if not exactly, at least you have some guidelines to know what to change, and what kind of things you can experiment with to move one way or the other.
I just want to add one simple consideration after Luca, because in the world of complexity theory, this point, this upper point in the middle, is a sort of a complex theorist called age of chaos. That is, in my idea, in our idea, the best design is not the simple design, but the design working at the edge of chaos. That is, it is not boring, but not complicated. But in this, the right point is the point where there is an understandable pattern. You can recognize the pattern, but you are stimulated by curiosity, by the novelty, by something intriguing. So this small path is a very tiny path, and it is difficult to find it. So our mind oscillate around this point, in exploring new possibilities, adding new, different, contradictory information, and going to the other part, trying to bring this new information in the new pattern. So, and we see in this way the creativity pattern of discovering better design, a better solution for a problem. So this, so in our idea, a good design solve as art the issue of complexity of our from the flow of information we have from experience, the complexity of experience, and the good design is a solution of the complexity of the experience.
Wow. I don't think we could have said it any better ourselves there. And it's quite interesting because I think a lot of us, when we look at things, when we look at products we develop, or even like for some of us that are in computer science or engineering, when we think about the programs we develop, ultimately the end user, the person who really needs to see it, needs to see that the experience itself is simple enough for them to understand, but behind the scenes, it offers enough for them to kind of get the experience across. So I really believe that, actually, 100%. And honestly, I think this has been fantastic. Thank you both for really sharing your thoughts across with this topic. Thank you guys so much. I just want to give them a round of applause, actually, for everybody. You can just give them a bit of a clap.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
So I think at this time, we're going to open up the floor for questions, and we'll transition out for questions. So if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to unmute yourselves and just ask our two panelists, or if not, we can put it in the chat as well. So we'll open the floor up for questions.
I want to add something while we wait for a question, and just in one sentence. So the idea that in the end, like we started with this, saying that aesthetic reasoning is so important to understand the word. So our point of view is that aesthetic reasoning and the appreciation of beauty is a way our brain deals with complexity. So beauty is not just ornament. It's not just for the pleasure of the senses, for contemplation, let's say, or there for just for philosophical reason. All of these things are there. I'm not saying they are not true, but I'm just saying there's some function of beauty in helping us to process information in an easier way.
I believe we have a question. I believe that is Dr. Montero.
Hey there, how are you? Giuseppe, Zollo, wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you too.
Okay.
How are you?
Yeah, it's terrific. And if I may, if you allow me to talk about going back to the idea of the complexity. And I'm looking at different styles of architecture, and particularly looking at Baroque style. The Baroque, I think, should be find unnecessary complexity. I don't know. And now is how do we? Does the different ages, different eras have a different way of understanding complexity, simplicity, elegance? You know, I mean, one of my cries right now is the death of elegance. Elegance has died basically in the last 20, 30 years. And elegance has been replaced by cool. So what is cool? And so I always have this ongoing discussion with my graduate students every time when I have an opportunity about the demise of elegance and the rise of cool, and how we are institutionalizing or normalizing those ideas. You know, if we put something. I was looking at Picasso. You know, I've seen Picasso's work and Picasso's museum in Germany, where there is a special in Münster in Germany. There is a museum dedicated for Picasso, and it kind of tells you his ideas, history of the ideas, how the way he designed. And if Picasso would do that stuff today, would he be considered as great artist? Is a sign of the reflection of the time. You know, I don't know if I'm making myself terribly clear here, but I hope you get my gist here. You know, particularly I'm saying, are we reading the signs of times when we assess particular types of complexities and notions of simplicity, notions of elegance? So.
Giuseppe, do you want to take it, or?
No, thank you. I don't understand very well the question.
So I believe one understanding of the question is that Vasily is asking is basically this sense of complexity is relative to a certain age, to a certain time, and how it changes, and why some ages and sometimes in our history seems to prefer a little bit more ornate, more complex, articulated artistic representation, and others instead. For instance, like you mentioned Baroque, but you know, the opposite could be like, I don't know, Romantic style, which is so austere, so severe, so naked. You know, not much ornament. I think that, you know, I don't know. This is of course a big statement to say, but. If this process of exploring complexity back and forth and oscillating between simple and complex is true at the individual level, and I think it is at that level, I don't know if it's true also at the higher level. For instance, at the group level, at the society level, maybe there are times in which the society needs more complexity. There are times in which, as a reaction, needs more simplicity. I think, for instance, all of this emphasis we mentioned before, the Apple style and the minimalism in design is probably, I see it as a reaction to the huge amount of information we have to process because of digital technology. So, you know, our life is much more complicated because we have too much information to absorb every day. And at some point, our mind just wants something simple, clean, and relaxing. because we need a break, basically. And maybe the example you made, the Baroque, was a reaction to the opposite sign, because before it was very classic, late Renaissance type of style that was too rigid in the way the presentation, especially the religious subject, was conceived to be. And then we had the Reformation, and so the church had to make it very strong, a very aggressive type of communication. So they needed more stuff there to communicate their power. I don't know. I'm venturing in a field that is not mine, but for the sake of discussion, I think it's a lot of fun for me to venture in these territories.
I want to add another answer to the answer of Luca. I think that the complexity is not something concerning a culture or a period. The complexity is something concerning the experience, the human experience. You can find complexity also in your desk now, because if you try to describe each element of your desk, you see after a while that the description is infinite. The length of things that you can describe is infinite. You describe colors, shapes, position, light, weight, and many other relationships between you and things. So the complexity is a relationship between the observer and the world experiment. So every time, everywhere, the complexity is hidden under the surface of habits, and you don't see the complexity around you because you you see the world through your categories, your habits, your prototypes, your mind. If you remove some of these elements, you are able to see the complexity everywhere. This is the first consideration. The second consideration is that the complexity is not connected with the concept of ornament of the Baroque, of the exploration of new forms, of new decorations of a period, for example, a Baroque period. The complexity, what do we say when we say that something is complex? We say that we cannot fully understand this thing. And because if you try to describe the complex thing, there is every time a residual that you cannot describe, but that you feel should be important. So the concept of complexity is very connected how you describe the ability to catch the meaning of your experience. If for you an experience, the thing is simple, you say, okay, I understand it. I can do something with this thing. When you say this is complex, say, I see something. I can do something for this, but I'm losing something. I'm losing something. So the concept of complexity is very important in how we perceive and understand the world around us. And in our opinion, when we are not able to make something with the world as we usually see, you had to go in the territory of complexity. And the complexity could be a resource. And we do that. Anytime we try to understand something that is puzzling, that is enigmatic, we go in the the kingdom of complexity, and we are going to catch for new evidences, new ideas, new sensations in order to grasp the meaning that we lose.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Okay.
So I see here there's a question in the chat from Ricardo from our friends from our design factories from around the world. From the last comments, do you think that today the aesthetic concept in the product is being simplified until the meaning is lost? And in that case, it ceases to have a meaning and becomes simply superficial? Or do you think we have hope? I really like this question a lot. I think that has a lot of value in terms of how we look at the meaning behind the products that we design. So we'd love to hear your feedback on this question.
Yeah, I love that question too. I think that yeah, always we have hope. I'm optimistic. But in general, I think there's a risk too, and I think we see this every day, not just in design. Like Ricardo says, you know, yeah, when you subtract information, you become obvious, you become trivial, and you simplify to the point that you don't understand Giuseppe was saying the complexity is there, right? We cannot ignore it. We have to question it. We have to try to solve it, to address it, but we should not forget about it. And I think that what Ricardo says, that's a trend there. And many disciplines, not just in design, of making very simple. I think politics is probably the best example, which, you know, political communication sometimes simplifies too much a message so that the reality is completely distorted. But even in design, we can distort reality with design. We can make it too simple. We can make it too obvious, too automatic. For instance, you know, just an example, you know, streaming, now we'll be streaming more than ever probably during this pandemic as a form of entertainment. Now, for me, the fact that the streaming platform starts your video automatically at the end, that's a simplification because you don't have to think, right? You can just go with it. But that's dangerous because it's this sort of passive entertainment, this binge watching that in the end, I mean, there's nothing bad with it, you know, to do it once in a while. But as a designer mindset, I'm a little bit worried that all of this automatism, all of this doing things without thinking, we're gonna pay a price for it. And I see that all over the place. So it's also something that as you know, people who study these things, who practice this thing, probably could think, try to counteract somehow, or at least to discuss, you know, it's something that we should do. There's a lot of automatic things that is going on, especially when it comes to the digital world. You know, think of what the social media do to your data, things what they feed us with the information that they want. We don't even know why certain information appear in our in our Facebook feed, for instance. Nobody really knows. The way the algorithms select what we see in the feed and what we see on the top, what we see at the bottom, we don't know. And Facebook has never revealed how they do it. I would like to have an active role myself to select the information that I want to see. For instance, I feel like this need. Of course, it's going to be more complex. There's a price to pay. I'm willing to pay that price, and I think that in the end, it's more rewarding, even if it's at the beginning, it's a little bit more effort. You know, it requires more effort.
I think that we live in a very interesting period for designer, first of all, because in this period, we have new questions. The question about fairness, the question about the sustainability, the climate, economic sustainability, and a new global relationship among countries. So new question, new collective question. So, and the problem now is what is the form, the shape, the language, and also the design, able to help us to build a new relationship with the world. So the problem of design is not just to make things, is to make new connections between the inner world of values, of desires, of intentions, of memories, of a group, of a collectivity, of an individual, and the outside world, the world of others, of other things. I remember a book I read when I was young called Roi Guran, and Roi Guran was an anthropologist. He made a very interesting analysis of instruments made by Homo sapiens in Paleolithic era or Neolithic era. But he said that there is an outer world of things, of others, and this is the inner world of a community. And between the outer world and the inner world, there is what we call envelope technique in French. That is envelope, what is the translation in English, Luca? Un guscio?
I would say shell.
A shell technique. A shell technique is made of tools, by things we use to make a good connection with between the inner world of a community and the outer world. So, and I think the design is just in this shield, is a part of this shield. How to make a good connection. And the good connection are now in crisis because we have questions, but we don't have answers. So the answers is not just theoretical answers. The answers are behaviors, collective behaviors. And so this is the question. And good design can help us to make better collective behaviors.
Wow, I think that's excellent. And I think that's such a great response for that question. One of the things that I'll also throw out there is that, you know, as we are running a little low on time, I also want to be cognitive of a couple of things that were said in the chat before. You know, Ricardo is like on fire today, and also mentioned earlier that, you know, he really thinks that the beauty of the product is often underestimated. And sometimes we don't take into account the great communication and functional work that these objects have. And so, you know, to say the least, that as we look towards balancing between simplicity and complexity, we want to make sure we don't lose meaning in what we create. And so it's often a balancing act. And I think Dr. Iandoli also posted a very interesting link to continue the conversation. They've created this blog. It's elegantdesignthinking.com. On this blog, you'll probably learn a lot about even the theories as well as some of the strategies that designers need to, you know, consider, especially as they look towards creating, when they mentioned earlier, effective complexity. With that being said, I also wanted to take this opportunity also to, you know, as we always do in a lot of our events, to ask for some feedback. So in the chat, I'm going to post a very quick form. It's about 3 questions. I think most of us in the network see this all the time as well. So I'd like to just give us a few minutes to just click on that link in the chat and to just fill out some feedback for us about how the session went today. Then we had that awkward silence between people clicking and clicking 3 answers. And I think with that, I think we're just about getting close to time. With that being said, I just want to also give this an opportunity to just thank our wonderful panelists again for their time. We really appreciate you joining us, especially as most of us all are in all different time zones as well. And thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Zollo, as well as Dr. Iandoli as well. I'll probably be seeing you tomorrow. And just want to give them a big round of applause, everybody. Let's unmute and then just give them a big round of applause.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you guys so much. And, you know, for more information, everybody, about, for those of us who are not a part of our network, about our Design Factory, feel free to visit us. The Design Factory network is dfgn.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. And in addition, if you all are interested in learning more about St. John's University's Design Factory as well, that we're actually located or online at stjohns.edu/designfactory. So I'll put that in the chat in case anyone would like to visit that as well. We're looking forward to doing more of these events, and honestly looking for more experts to talk to as we kind of explore this topic even further. So thank you all so much, and looking forward to hearing from everyone soon.
See you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Kevin.
Ciao, Carlo.
Thank you all.